Today's video is brought to you by Glass Spider Publishing. Offering a wide range of hybrid book publishing services, Glass Spider Publishing is your one-stop shop for professional editing, design, publication, and book marketing services. Visit glassspiderpublishing.com today to learn more. Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to do an updated version of one of my older videos that was really popular and kind of see how I would do it today, since the way that I paint has changed so much in the 6 or 7 years since I first did this golden hour painting. In my YouTube membership group, we had a poll to see which painting I would recreate, and this is the one that won. So I'm starting out with my number 12 long handle filbert, and I'm doing an underpainting of, it's burnt sienna, but it's a transparent burnt sienna. Now for the underpainting, that doesn't necessarily matter that it's transparent, but I do use it a little bit for some glazing later on. So I just prefer a transparent burnt sienna. In some brands, you can find it under the name, you'll see like transparent red oxide, transparent red earth. Some brands just say burnt sienna. Just look to see if it's opaque or transparent, and look for the pigment code PR101 if you want to get a transparent version of this color, which is my very favorite color to paint with. I use it a lot. I let that dry, and now I'm moving on to my number 6 filbert, and I'm mixing up a good amount of Diox purple and some matte medium. I want this color very transparent, and I did add a little bit of my burnt sienna into that too, just to make sure the Diox purple wasn't so vivid. And I'm just using the side of my filbert to kind of scratch out basically where I want everything to be. I cannot stress this enough. The thinner and more transparent and more scrubby this paint is at this point, the easier it's going to be to cover up and get rid of later if there's something you don't like. The thicker, darker, and harder your lines are here, the more you're going to struggle to cover those things up that you don't like later. So work really thin. Use a good amount of matte medium to get that paint nice and transparent, and then scrub it down so it's very soft on the edges. Take some time here to just kind of sketch out where you feel like you want the composition. You don't have to, get everything perfectly right now. I obviously am basing this off of my original golden hour painting, so I was basically going for the same kind of composition, but as you'll see here in a little bit, I get a big streak of this color in what is going to be the middle of the sky, and I don't even worry about it. I just let it go. So I just want you to have that kind of confidence in this area as well. Just scrubbing in the canopy of the tree here. But I'm doing the exact same thing. Notice I'm not doing any details. I'm not being specific with anything. I'm not drawing leaves or a very distinct shape to this canopy. I also want the canopy to just kind of fade into the sky. The sky is starting to darken, and so the edges of the tree where the sky is darker would be a little less indistinct. So don't put any hard edges in there. I'm going onto the edge of my brush here, but still working very loosely, trying to get an idea for where my tree trunk is going to be. And if you notice, my tree trunk really gets away from me here, and it's super crooked, but I don't worry about it because I know things are going to change as I go. So just get generally your tree trunk in there. Anything you don't like can be taken care of later. Now, this method of painting is something that I kind of developed for myself during the pandemic. I took a little bit of a break from doing videos, and all I did every single day for a couple of years during the pandemic was paint. And I would paint, 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours a day, every single day. And in that time, I kind of developed the way that I paint personally today. See there, I put that big blob of that paint right in the sky, and I'm not even worried about it. So that should show you that anything that you don't like will be hidden later. Dry that off, going into my cadmium orange and a little bit of medium just to keep it still a bit transparent. We're going to start blocking in the sky. I think I developed painting like this in, all the different layers because I was learning painting and art concepts from a couple different oil painters. And I really wanted to be able to achieve the light as well as the soft edges that are so easy to get in oil paint but can be super difficult in acrylic paint. And so I had to try and find ways to manipulate acrylic paint to get that oil paint look. And as you can see here, I'm just overlapping right into the tree with that sky color because you would definitely see the sky through the tree. So do not be afraid to get in there and overlap your tree a little bit. Same thing on the ground here. Overlap those colors. That's what's going to make this an effective painting. If you try really hard to keep your colors separate, it's going to look really blocky. It's going to look blotchy. It's just not going to have that moody softness. I'm going right into my cadmium yellow. I did not clean the orange off my brush. And just continuing blocking in my sky and my lighter colors. I'm even overlapping the tree trunk a bit there with that yellow, even though the yellow's not covering it and changing the shape of the tree. I'm not keeping anything separate. Right over the top of those bushes. That's how we're going to get that nice glow that makes those bushes look like they're backlit, is by overlapping it with our sky colors. Really important here, I would keep a hairdryer with you and make sure every single layer is completely dry before you move on. Otherwise, you're going to end up getting mud and you're going to really struggle. Back to my number 12 and getting some more Diox purple. Lots of medium, nice and transparent here. This is going to freak some of you out, but we're doing it. We are going to glaze this entire image, everything with this purple. Now my brush was really wet. That's why it's really streaky here. So I'm going to take a paper towel and just kind of wipe that away. If your brush is not too wet, You don't have to do that. I'm only doing it because I'm having a hard time getting rid of some of the brush texture because of the extra moisture in my brush. Just wiping away the excess. The purpose of that glaze is to kind of assimilate everything back into itself. On a night where you've got a very vivid sunset that is throwing tons of color all over, it's a very similar thing. You know, the sun is kind of bathing everything in these super warm tones, and that's exactly the effect that we're aiming for here with that glaze. Back to my number 6, and this is just Diox Purple right now, doing a very similar thing to what I did at the beginning. It's just pure Diox. I don't have as much medium in it, so it's not quite as transparent. And I'm not scrubbing it out quite as thinly. And I know that purple is super vivid right now, but as it dries with that orange underneath, it will darken and it won't be quite as distinctly purple. Plus, we're still going to add several layers on top of it, which are going to kind of tamp down that purple and move it closer to a very dark, shadowy color. Do notice real quick, we're only 2 layers in, and that blob on the sky that I don't necessarily want there, it's already becoming very indistinct. So it happens very quickly that you can lose things that you're not interested in keeping in your image. Same thing up in the tree, but I'm not going to cover the entire canopy. I'm going to leave little holes, very soft edged holes here and there, just to let some of that sky color peek through. Just work on the tree trunk a little bit, but notice I'm just kind of going down the left-hand side, and that's pretty much just kind of starting the shadow for the tree. I'll work on the highlighted side later. Very, very loosely. Notice I'm holding my brush way far back so that I don't end up making everything too tight and distinct. It's just going to throw off the look of everything. if everything is too tight and very precise. In fact, later you're going to see what I tend to do when I feel like my work is tightening up, when I'm struggling to loosen up and I'm getting too specific-y with my brush strokes. And I know some of you will kind of have a heart attack when you see me do it. Clean brush, a little more medium, more cadmium orange. Let's go back into the sky. The purple I just laid down is still wet, but I'm not working on top of it, so it doesn't matter. Just defining the edge of the tree just a little bit more, still overlapping it. Here you can use these opaque colors, the cadmium orange and yellow, a little bit more thickly. If you have areas on your tree trunk, like right there, where you want to kind of make it a bit more distinct or get rid of some scratchy lines that you were experimenting with earlier, you can use the paint a little bit heavier right against the edge of the tree trunk to define that if you need to, but I would use that sparingly. Primarily, I just did it on that left-hand side near the darkest part of the tree. A little more medium, back into my yellow, still have my dirty brush, it's still got the orange on it. Never be afraid to get your hands in the paint. Use a blocking lotion if you're concerned about it, but I find that fingers blend much better than just about any other tool that you could use. Still going over the top of those bushes. And just punch the glow a little bit more right there. But if you notice, that streak is pretty much gone now. And I wasn't even trying to cover it specifically. Just picked up a bit of medium. I had enough paint on my brush. Remember that the medium is a very essential part of working in this manner because it thins the paint down so that it's transparent, which makes the layers effective. If you're not using the medium, your paint may not be as transparent as you need it to be, and then working in layers is kind of pointless. But it may make your painting look a little bit more flat. If you don't have any medium or you can't find any, you can use like gloss, not glaze, varnish. You can use varnish if you have to. It's not my favorite way to work, but you can. You can use glazing medium. You can use gloss medium. I prefer the matte finish. And in Liquitex, the matte dries a little slower than the gloss, so you've got a little bit more working time. But there's a lot of different mediums that you can use as a painting medium. I am now using Indian yellow with the glazing medium and just kind of glazing the entire thing with that Indian yellow. Indian yellow is very transparent, which is why I'm using it and not cadmium yellow, which is opaque. And with that yellow on top of the purple, you can see that it's starting to gray down a little bit and get a little darker and a little less vividly purple. Make sure it's good and dry. I always hear people who are impatient and they start painting before their glaze is dry and then they get frustrated because it gets muddy and ruined. Don't be that person. Get the hairdryer out and get it completely dry before you move on. Now I've added some phthalo green to my palette because that's going to start helping us get that purple a little bit darker. Phthalo green and Diox purple together make a really nice kind of a navy blue, and paired with the orange and the yellow tones, that navy blue is going to be nudged towards a chromatic black, which is exactly what I'm looking for here. I'm working thicker, more specifically, and starting to really build the shadows in the bushes and the tree. The great thing about working with a chromatic black, which is a very, very dark color that is made by mixing colors, the cool thing about working with those instead of a pre-made black or dark color is that I can shift it depending on what I want. So in a little bit later in the ground, When I mix the color, I do mix in a tiny bit more green than the purple, which helps suggest some very, very dark green tones in the grasses and bushes without going, bright and unrealistically green. Or I can nudge it a little closer to purple and get deeper, darker shadows. And besides, the chromatic black, it just keeps a little bit more life. Even if you glance at it and you're like, oh, that set of bushes there is black, your eye knows that it's not black. It sees vibrancy, it sees life and depth and warmth in that color. Where if you just threw in black or even a color like Payne's gray, it would seem flat and lifeless and dimensionless. It just wouldn't have the vibrancy that all of these colors layered together does, because the light will reflect through all of those layers and you will see the suggestions, you'll see the effect of every single color in that layer, even if you can't specifically pick out those individual colors. Using that same mix of color up here in the tree, and just not applying it quite as much as I did the previous layers, letting everything underneath show through in patches. Keep soft edges. Let the edges of your tree kind of dissipate into the sky. Really, the only hard edge we want in this painting is kind of that left-hand side of the tree trunk where the darkest part of the tree meets a bright part of the sky. That's really the only sharp edge I've got in this painting. That's how you create contrast, which creates drama, which creates interest, and it's an area that you want to look at. Again, just a little up that left-hand side, the darkest edge of the tree. Kind of created a little knot in the tree up there. And really darkening up those bushes. Just work a bit of texture into the ground. Little bit more darkness up in the canopy of the tree. But I'm being very, very precious with it, keeping it to really just the heaviest part of the tree. Get it all nice and dry again because we're about to glaze one more time. All right, back to my number 6 and some cadmium yellow with a good amount of medium. Tiny bit of Titan violet pale. So I don't like to use titanium white in my paintings because I like to, find creative ways to lighten. You are free to use titanium white here, though. I know it's really hard to tell, but that is ever so slightly got a violet tone to it. And it's really a pretty color, but titanium white is perfectly fine. And we're just going to start nudging in where the brightest part of our sky is going to be. Now, have a little faith here because when you're painting this part, you might be looking at it thinking, this yellow is way too light for this area of the sky. It's too big of a jump, and I agree, it is. But I'm going to glaze everything again afterwards, which will press everything together and assimilate this color into the sky. So don't worry about it being too light. And do overlap those bushes a little bit. I already know that's where my sun is going to go, so I'm just building up that brightness a little bit more in that area. Starting to bring in a little bit of texture with that lighter color into the ground, just kind of flicking upwards generally to get some scrubby grass shapes in here. And this is kind of the area where I started getting frustrated because I was trying to be too deliberate, too specific with those grassy shapes. And I felt like it was starting to look really forced and stiff and kind of cartoony grasses. So I went a little bit nuts, and you'll see that here in just a little bit. All right, back to the number 12, lots of medium. Load that brush full of medium and a little bit more of our purple, just a very pale. I felt like the sky wasn't quite deep enough, so I want to glaze it down with a bit of purple, but I want to be really careful and not turn the sky purple. Just right here through the tree and the top portion of the sky. See how faint that is? You can barely see it, but look at how much it's warming up the sky there. That's exactly what I wanted. Remember, start small. I would rather have you mix too little paint in there and have to put more than to mix too much. If you put too much paint down, you're gonna kind of be stuck with it if you don't wipe it away real quick. So you're gonna add just a little bit more. That was nice, but let's go a little deeper. Clean brush, again, lots of medium into the Indian yellow. I did not dry that purple up at the top because it doesn't matter. I'm going to be working in the lower area. I will overlap them a tiny bit, but not enough to make it matter if that purple's wet or dry. I'm just, again, dabbing off some excess paint because my brush was still pretty wet. Back to my number 6, lots of medium into my Diox purple and the green. Just finding a nice balance between the two. If it leans more one way or the other, it doesn't really matter. We're really gonna darken these shadows. I think my glaze might have still been wet here because I thought it doesn't really matter, but as you can see, I am struggling a little bit. It does give you a different look to your brush strokes, and I didn't really love it, so I just kind of did a little bit of it and then kind of moved on. But yeah, when you build your entire technique around working on dry layers rather than wet into wet, when you have a little bit of wet paint, it kind of throws off the whole works. Let me zoom in here a little bit and kind of show you how I'm doing these grasses using the edge of my brush and just lightly flicking upward. I like to dust out the bottom edge of that shape with my finger. It makes it look a bit more like grass and less like a flick on a canvas. A little bit of scraping, just finding those fun textures. And now I'm going to do my very favorite texture making technique that I know a lot of you don't like. You're free to skip it, obviously. You're free to do whatever you like. Bring a little bit more water over to my palette. Get my purple-green mixture. And I'm going to mix it into that water until the paint just kind of starts to move. That's good. And I'm very lightly flicking. It's very controlled because I don't want to splatter all over the canvas. It's just a very light, slow movement to get a very controlled spray. I think it looks like little seed heads or dried flowers or even bugs, all kinds of things that you would see in a scene like that. Clean brush, some more water, getting my pale yellow mixture now. And we're gonna just do a little bit of flicks with some of that too, because some of those things would be catching the light. Don't go crazy with splatters. Usually I tell you the more splatters, the better. But here, just go very subtle with it. Don't go overboard. Going to my long liner, I'm just gonna kind of rough in a few smaller branches. Use some extra water when you're using the long liner because otherwise it doesn't flow very far. But even with that, you're really only gonna get a couple of brush strokes before you have to load up. Hold that long liner nice and far back, again to take away a little bit of control, which I think gives a bit more of a believable shape to your branches. If you have a branch that's too thick, too dark, too whatever, just give it a quick wipe with your finger. See, like that pretty harsh line. Quick little wipe, and then when it dries, it will lighten up a little bit too. Let's get couple little scrubby tree saplings next to our tree here. The harder you press with that brush, the fatter your line can be. Just making sure that shadow is nice and dark. And now I just put the long liner flat on the tree and just kind of scrubbing in some extra little darkness and shapes. I like to use the long liner like this because it gives such an indistinct blob, or it gives a blob with very indistinct edges. And I really, really like that. It's a great technique if you want to give the effect of tree leaves without making yourself crazy, going in there doing all kinds of leaves, or without getting a really phony look by kind of stamping the same brush shape all over the tree. Just lay that long liner flat and get a couple of little broken edged blobby shapes. Really, really effective. I love this technique. And I know that looks really purple and dark, but it's just because it's wet. Once it dries, it'll sink back into the rest of the tree. So here, see, I've got the entire length of the bristles pressed flat. That's all I'm doing. Make sure that's good and dry. On to our number 6. And I'm going to glaze just a hint of this transparent burnt sienna because I feel like I lost a little of these bushes over here. So I'm just kind of adding them back in. And the best way to do that is with the underpainting color. Dirty brush, it still has that transparent burnt sienna on there, and I picked up more of my purple. Again, just working a bit more of those grasses on the right back in. If I go at it with just my dark color at this point, it's going to stand out. It's going to look purple. It's going to be a completely different color set to the rest of the colors. More of my purple-green mixture, just into that same blob, a bit more of the burnt sienna. And I've got a nice grayed down color that really is made up of all of the colors that already exist in those bushes. All right, few more grasses with that mixture. And it's just about frustration go time. It's not actually frustration. This is how I deal with it when I'm starting to get frustrated. And it also reminds me to loosen up. It shows my hand what it feels like to loosen up with that brush. So while it might look like I'm kind of freaking out, trust me, it's by design. It's something that I intended to do. It's a reminder for myself. Just kind of punching a bit more of that orange into the sky. Making sure all my sky colors are connected. All right, this is my number 2 long handle filbert, and I'm going to mix up a really pale color again with the cadmium yellow and the Titan violet. Super pale. And I'm going to find where I want the sun and kind of block it in, keeping edges very soft. It's kind of setting behind these grasses. So I am going to overlap into those grasses as we go with this sun as well. Bit of medium to help me get that kind of blurred, transparent version of this color radiating out from the sun. Same color on my brush, just going to add a few grasses with it. It's fairly transparent, probably about a 50% mixture with the medium. See how it's just not working out, getting that bright color in there. It just looks tight. It just doesn't look good. And I didn't want the grasses to be what you looked at, so I don't want real distinct grasses. Adding more medium so it's very transparent. Picking up some orange. I did not clean my brush. I'm going to dirty it with just a hint of that mix of the purple, green, burnt sienna, and just loosely sketch in a bit of a highlight down the sun-facing side of the tree. But I'm keeping it sketchy, I'm keeping it loose. Just a little more medium. Just a couple suggestions of highlights up in the branches here. Sorry you can't see that. I'm just adding a little bit of yellow to the mix. That same exact color still on my brush. Decided maybe that could fix these tight, dumb-looking grasses. But it can't, so here's the drama. Just start scribbling. When you feel like things aren't going your way, don't be afraid, just scribble. If you have the confidence to just scribble over something, you might find that it helps you loosen up, but it also helps bring a little bit of extra texture and excitement to your painting. I love the way that scribble turned out. So I'm back to my number 6. I've got some medium and I've got some Indian yellow, nice and transparent. And we're gonna glaze over those grasses that I added, as well as the sun. All of that is dry now. Pretty much over everything that I just did. The highlights, the grasses, the sun, all of that. Cleaned off my brush. Let's go back into our green-purple mixture. And I'm going to do a similar thing with that. Good amount of medium. And starting in the shadow, I'm just going to start glazing a bit of this, especially over some of those grasses that I kind of scrubbed up. It kind of pulls some of those into the shadows and makes them look a little bit more natural. I absolutely love glazing, and I think that if you can be comfortable with glazing and learn how to glaze, you will open up a huge number of possibilities for yourself. There are things that you can achieve through glazing that you can't through mixing. There are things that are so much easier to do with glazing than it is through mixing. And I know it's intimidating right at first. It feels really awkward to just paint over everything you just did. But it's a technique that I personally can't live without. I cannot paint without glazing. This is a clean brush, and I'm just going to spot glaze a bit of that transparent burnt sienna, because that's really where I get a lot of that warmth and glow. Back to my number 2, my super bright color, and we're gonna finish up the sun. Just a few last minute pops of the brightest color in the grasses and very faintly in just a couple select spots on the trunk of the tree. My brush had too much paint on it. I just want a small hint because I know I'm going to glaze it one more time. So I'm just going to lightly scumble a very faint layer of this color into a few areas so that when I glaze in a second, I can get a bit more of a glow from it. Just a poke of the pure Titan Pale or titanium white, whatever you're using. There's that scumble of that tiny, tiny amount of paint. Right into the bushes. You can barely even see that pale color that I'm scumbling in there. See how little paint is on my brush? Very, very little. This is a good technique if you get something too dark and you know, oh, I don't want that to be darker. I want that to be brighter. Just lightly scumble a very pale color over top of it, dry it like I am here, and then glaze it, and you'll pull that brightness right back. And that's what I'm going to do with my medium and Indian yellow right here. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this painting and learning some of these techniques. And let me know if there's another one of my older paintings that you would like to see me recreate in this way. Thank you as always for watching and painting along with me, everyone. I'll see you next time.